The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship with Foyle Legal. For advice tailored to your situation, please consult a qualified legal professional. Welcome to Personal Injury Claims Explained by Foyle Legal, your trusted source for understanding personal injury claims in Western Australia. Each week, we simplify complex legal issues, from motor vehicle accidents to workplace injuries, so you can confidently navigate your rights and claim the compensation you deserve.
Okay, so are you ready to dive into this stuff today? It's something you hope you never have to deal with, but better to be prepared, right? Personal injury claims, we're tackling it head on. You got to know your rights, got to know what to do if, God forbid, something happens, to maximize what you might be entitled to.
Yeah. No one wants to think about getting hurt, but accidents do happen and you've got to be prepared. And I think that's what's so interesting about this deep dive we're doing today.
For sure.
You shared some material from this law firm, Foyle Legal. They're based in Perth, Australia, and their whole website's like a crash course in personal injury law.
Okay, so they're dealing with this stuff every single day.
Oh, yeah. That's got to give them some serious street cred, right? Definitely. And they don't make it all like legal mumbo jumbo, They actually break it down in a way that's easy to understand, even if you've never stepped foot in a law school.
Love it. All right, so their website goes deep on understanding personal injury law and the claims process. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, can you give us a quick, jargon-free explanation of what exactly IS personal injury law?
Yeah, so it's basically a part of law that covers situations where someone gets injured because of someone else's carelessness, right? Think slip and falls, car accidents, stuff like that.
You're like someone isn't paying attention and causes an accident that hurts someone else.
Exactly, and that's what they call negligence. They define it on the website as someone not taking reasonable care, which then leads to someone else getting hurt. They actually emphasize how important this concept of negligence is. It's kind of the foundation of most personal injury cases.
Like proving that someone else was at fault because they weren't being careful. Gotcha.
Right, exactly. But there is one interesting exception they mention, and it has to do with workers' compensation claims.
Okay.
In those cases, proving fault isn't always necessary. So that's a little wrinkle.
Interesting. Okay, so let's say I find myself in a situation where I might have a personal injury claim.
Okay.
What's step one? I mean, do I just call a lawyer right off the bat? What do I do?
Well, Foyle Legal actually says the very first thing you do, and it seems obvious, but it's super important, you have to report the accident. So if it's a car accident, you're calling the police. If it happens at work, you're reporting it to your manager or HR. Slip and fall, you're making sure the property owner knows. Creating that record right from the start is essential.
Right. So documentation is key from the get-go, no matter what the situation.
Yeah, like you want a paper trail. And then, this is huge, you got to seek medical attention immediately.
Even if you don't think it's that serious.
Especially then, right? Because some injuries, they don't show up right away. And, you could have something that gets worse over time. Plus, that initial doctor's visit, that creates a record that's going to be super important for your case later on.
Smart. So you're basically establishing a timeline right from the start, showing when and how your injuries happened because of that accident.
Exactly. And that leads into the next stage they talk about, which is gathering strong medical evidence.
Okay, so we're talking like beyond that initial doctor's visit.
Yeah, so we're talking specialist reports, test results. If your injuries are serious, you might need long-term care plans, all of that.
So it's really about building a solid case, showing the extent of your injuries and how they've impacted your life.
Exactly. And this all feeds into figuring out what your claim is actually worth.
Right. Because how do you even begin to put a price tag on something like that?
That's where it gets interesting. They break it down into 9 key factors that all contribute to the value of a personal injury claim.
9. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Just the medical bills?
Well, that's part of it, but it goes way beyond that.
Really?
You've got lost wages if you can't work, And then what about your potential earnings down the line, especially if your injuries affect your ability to do your job long term? And then there are things like pain and suffering, emotional distress, all of that factors into.
Wow, I would never have thought of some of that stuff.
Yeah, and that's where having a good lawyer can make a huge difference. They know how to calculate the value of those less obvious damages, like the long-term impact of emotional distress, and make sure you're compensated fairly for all of it.
Right, because most of us wouldn't even know where to begin with something like that.
Exactly. And it's interesting. The website even mentions that some personal injury settlements can range from like $20,000 to $200,000 or even over $1 million in really serious cases.
Okay, now we're talking real money.
Right. So this is serious business.
I'm starting to see why having a legal expert on your side could be a game changer in a situation like this.
Absolutely. I mean, they're the ones who know the ins and outs of this stuff. They can fight for your rights and help you navigate what can be a really complicated and overwhelming process.
Yeah, because let's be real, most of us wouldn't know the first thing about personal injury law. So when do we actually bring a lawyer into the mix? So timing-wise, when's the best time to actually get a lawyer involved in a potential personal injury case?
Well, the website's pretty clear about this. Ideally, you want to at least talk to a lawyer as soon as possible after the injury happens.
Okay.
And, this doesn't mean you're like hiring them on the spot or anything. It's more about understanding your options, making sure you don't make any missteps early on that could hurt you later.
So it's kind of a proactive move rather than waiting till things get messy.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Even in those early stages when you're reporting the accident, dealing with insurance adjusters, having a lawyer in your corner can be super helpful. They'll make sure you're documenting everything properly, not saying anything that could come back to bite you,
Right, because you might not even realize you're doing something that could hurt your case down the line.
Exactly. So it's about getting that expert advice right off the bat. Now, once you've got all your medical evidence lined up and you have a better sense of how this injury has impacted you, physically, financially, that's when the real negotiation with the insurance company begins. And here's something interesting. The website says that most personal injury cases, they actually get settled out of court.
Really? So it's not always about those dramatic courtroom showdowns we see on TV.
Right. It's more about strategy, negotiation, working towards a settlement.
Interesting. Okay, so what does that process actually look like?
So once your lawyer has gathered all the evidence and figured out how much your claim is potentially worth, they'll usually send what they call a demand letter to the insurance company. This letter lays out everything: the accident, your injuries, and of course, how much money you're seeking in damages.
So that's kind of like the opening move, right?
Exactly. It sets the stage for negotiation. But here's the thing, and the website makes this very clear. The insurance company, their main goal is to,
Protect their bottom line.
minimize how much they have to pay out. So they're going to try to settle for the lowest amount possible.
So you've got to be ready to play hardball.
Well, you've got to be prepared. It's like a chess match. And this is another area where having a lawyer is crucial. See, when the insurance company comes back with a counteroffer, your lawyer can analyze it, compare it to similar cases, and tell you if it's a fair deal or if you should push for more.
They're like your personal negotiators.
Exactly. And this back and forth can go on for a while, with both sides making their case. But the important thing to remember is, and the website stresses this, you have the power to say no. You don't have to accept an offer that doesn't cover your needs or feel fair based on what you're going through.
It's reassuring to know you have options, and you don't have to just accept whatever they throw at you. But I imagine it can still be intimidating, especially when you're dealing with something as important as your health and your finances.
Oh, absolutely. It takes guts to stand up for yourself in those situations, but that's another reason why having that experienced lawyer by your side is so important. They're your advocate, your voice at the table.
They're fighting for you.
Exactly. I had this one case. This client came to us after they got hit by a car. The insurance company made this offer, seemed pretty generous at first glance, covered the immediate medical bills, some lost wages.
But I'm betting there was more to it.
Oh, there always is. Once we dug a little deeper, we realized that this client was going to need long-term physical therapy, might even have to switch careers because of their injuries.
Wow.
That initial offer wouldn't have even scratched the surface. So we ended up negotiating a much higher settlement.
Good for you.
We were able to show the insurance company the true impact of those injuries, the long-term costs.
Right. The things they weren't considering.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have someone who can see the big picture, who can fight for what you deserve.
Totally agree. So even if you think you're in a decent spot, getting that expert legal advice can make a huge difference in the outcome of your case. But let's say we've gone back and forth and there's a settlement offer on the table. What are the key things to consider before saying yes?
Well, the website lays out some great questions to ask yourself. First and foremost, does this offer cover all of your medical expenses? And I mean all of them, past, present, future. Because some injuries, they require ongoing care. You don't want to end up footing the bill down the line.
Right, got to think long term.
Absolutely. And then you got to look at lost wages. Does the offer truly make up for the income you've lost? And what about your future earning capacity? If those injuries mean you can't go back to your old job, that's a huge factor.
Right.
And finally, don't forget about the less tangible stuff like pain and suffering, emotional distress, how this whole thing has impacted your life.
So it's not just about the physical and financial, but also the emotional toll it's taken.
Exactly. And remember, settling a personal injury claim, it's a big deal. Don't feel pressured to accept something that doesn't feel right or doesn't truly address your needs.
It's your life, your claim, you get to decide. So take your time, weigh your options carefully, and don't be afraid to ask questions. This has been super insightful. But what happens if, we can't reach a fair settlement? What are our options then? So if we're at an impasse, if things just aren't moving, who's going to court the next step? What happens then?
Well, it could be, but the website, they actually emphasize that it's not always the automatic next move, Going to court, it can be a long and expensive process, so you got to weigh those factors.
Yeah, it's not a decision to be taken lightly. So before things escalate to that level, what else can you try? Are there other options?
Yeah, for sure. They mention a few things like mediation, for example. That's where you have like a neutral third party who steps in and tries to help both sides find a compromise. It can be way less formal than going to court, a little less, adversarial maybe.
Yeah.
And sometimes just having that independent person there to facilitate things, it can help bridge the gap and everyone can walk away a little happier.
It's like having a referee, right? Making sure everyone's playing fair.
Exactly. But if you try mediation and it just doesn't work out, or it's just not the right approach for the situation, then yeah, heading to court might be the only option left on the table.
Right, the last resort.
Yeah, but even then, Foyle Legal, they really hammer home like how important it is to be prepared.
So what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
If you're headed to court, what do you need to do?
Well, you're going to need to gather even more evidence, more documentation, maybe line up expert witnesses who can really talk about your injuries or what happened. And then, get ready to actually present your case in front of a judge and jury.
Whoa. Okay. So that's where things get serious.
It's a whole other ball game.
Definitely see why having that experienced lawyer in your corner throughout this whole process is crucial. I can imagine it's easy to feel overwhelmed and lost, especially if you're already dealing with an injury.
Oh, 100%. And that's what they're there for. They're with you every step of the way, fighting for your rights, explaining all the legal stuff in plain English, and most importantly, working to get you the best possible outcome, whether that's a fair settlement or a win in court.
So they're not just legal experts. They're like your guides, your advocates, helping you navigate this whole world of personal injury law.
Exactly. And the big takeaway here is knowledge is power. The more you know about your rights, the better equipped you are to handle a situation like this.
Absolutely. And, being proactive, seeking legal advice early on, it can make a world of difference. This has been seriously eye-opening. I feel like I've learned so much. We've gone from like personal injury law 101 all the way to the courtroom steps.
It's a wild ride.
It is. And it just goes to show, accidents happen. Being prepared is key.
All right. So as we wrap up here, one final thought I want to leave our listeners with. We focused a lot on the legal stuff today, the ins and outs of maximizing a settlement, but there's another layer to this, right?
And dealing with an injury, it's not just about the physical stuff. It can take a toll on you emotionally, mentally, and I think it's just as important to take care of yourself on that front as well. So to our listeners, remember, while you're navigating the legal complexities, don't forget to prioritize self-care, prioritize your mental well-being. It's a journey, and you've got this. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to Personal Injury Claims Explained by Foyle Legal. We hope this episode helped clarify your rights and next steps in your injury claim. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and visit foylelegal.com for more useful information. See you next time.